Welcome to Be Customer Led, where we'll explore how leading experts in customer and employee experience are navigating organizations through their own journey to be customer led, and the actions and behaviors employees and businesses exhibit to get there. And now your host, Marbu Brown.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Be Customer Led. Today, we're going to tackle the connection between emotions and customer experience, and we have a great guest to help us dive deep into this topic. It's Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the president of Shikatani Lacroix Design, or SLD, a global branding and design agency specializing in bold, future-forward customer experience transformations for major retailers, consumer brands, and financial institutions. For 30-plus years, and most of them at the helm of SLD, he has been a driving force behind some of the world's most successful brand evolutions. He's also the author of a brand new book entitled Blink Manifesto, ensuring brands create deep, lasting emotional connections in the blink of an eye. Welcome to the program, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Marbu. It's great to meet you again.
Hey, it's great to have you on the program, and I am really looking forward to diving into this topic because it's got that little bit of mystery to it. Yes, it's not a mystery, right? So let's get into it. But before we get into that in detail, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career journey so the listeners can get to know you a little better?
Okay, well, I grew up on an Air Force base. My father worked for the Canadian Air Force. So I grew up in Germany, Baden-Baden. Obviously, that instilled my zest for global travel because we have an office in Shanghai, and now we're going to be opening an office in Oman in the Middle East. Yeah, when we came back to Canada, I was always fascinated with how things work and how do we engage with people. I remember my father buying me this tank for Christmas. You know, he left me to play with it thinking I was going to play like a normal child. But I found a screwdriver and I took it apart. And I wanted to know, how did this tank work? And that's been the foundation for pretty well everything I do in my life. When I was about 18, I was making a big career decision. Do I go into design or do I go into the Air Force? Because I had applied to the ROC, the military academy. Mm-hmm. I said to myself, whoever comes back with confirmation of acceptance to the school I was going to go to, and Sheridan College in Oakville accepted the application. And so I went to Sheridan College. I worked for 3 years for different design firms. I would say I decided to start my own firm and started that firm called Boulevard Communication, which was a global agency with my best friend. 10 years later, we decided to part company, and I started Shikatani Lacroix 35 years ago. We view ourselves as a global agency, and we do work and have done work in pretty well every country in the world other than Russia and Australia.
Well, there's still time, isn't there?
No.
There's certainly still time, and you've been a part of some really interesting, like you said, design evolutions in financial institutions, in the food services industry, and in different things like that. And maybe some of those will come up a little bit more as we tackle this subject. But you coined this phrase, the blink factor, decades ago. So why don't you tell us what exactly is it, and how does it affect how we choose brands today?
Well, it goes back to 1993. We were actually hired by Pizza Hut to come up with a new concept. And we were doing research across the U.S. in focus groups. And people were calling Pizza Hut Red Roof. I'm going to the Red Roof for dinner. We said, what do you mean by red roof? Well, the shape of the roof is red, and that's how we recognize the brand. And so we did some research and found out that 40% of all communication is visual, 80% is color and shape at the time. And so I coined the phrase the blink factor. And I wrote an article in one of the magazines about what we had discovered, how people connect emotionally with brands through color and shape. Estee Lauder was in a lawsuit with Depp on patent infringement of their design Clinique. Depp had launched a brand called Basic, which looked identical to Clinique. And they hired me as an expert witness to demonstrate the blink factor, to reinforce that consumers make those buying decisions, a blink of the eye, the color and shape play an important role. And by the way, Estee Lauder won the lawsuit, and Depp had to stop marketing their Basic line of products.
That's interesting. So tell me a little bit about how this has affected the way you go about doing design, and how has it influenced some of the strategies that you've used to help these brands do these evolutions?
Well, at the beginning, it was all about owning the blink factor. It was all about looking at other brands and what do they own, and like Tide, for example, and you look at Best Buy, Blue, you look at the leading brands, they all owned a color. And so really, in the beginning, we looked at, what does this brand own and how does color influence the emotional connection? What does the color mean? And so we started digging deeper into research on what's the impact of color on the emotional connection. We found out it has a huge play on connecting. People, if you look at the banking industry, blue means trust. Red means passion, orange means, happiness. These colors play an important role on how consumers perceive their brands. And so we looked at color, and then we got involved in storytelling. And is the brand telling the right story? And is it lining up with the emotional connections?
So that affected how you all, put some of these, design concepts together, to influence how customers would experience any of these brands, whether it's a bank or it's a restaurant or a retailer. Yeah. Right. You recently authored a book. We talked about a little bit up front in the intro. Think Blink Manifesto. What fired you up to write the book? I mean, you've kind of been practicing these principles for a while. Why did you decide to write the book now?
It's a level of frustration because, as we do brand transformation programs, small and large, like if you look at Dairy Queen, reinvented them, called it DQ Grill and Chill, and that's driven their growth for the last 17 years. I was frustrated with clients coming to us with very functional needs. We're launching this new product. We have these 5 new features. It's faster, quicker, fresher, smarter, whatever. And we're saying, yeah, but that's not how consumers buy the product. They buy the product on, it's either a badge of their value proposition, or it's an emotional need that they have that the brand is helping fulfill, right? But no, the clients are really focused on those functional attributes. And so I wrote the book to educate the industry that emotion matters more than function. 80% now, it's been validated through university studies that 80% of how we buy is emotionally driven. It is driven by the memories those brands have through our heart.
There's how the emotions affect the buy. But what about how the emotions affect the experience, right? Because if customers have a great experience, they'll likely buy again, right? But, you could have a scenario where somebody has emotions and they go ahead and buy, but if the experience isn't great, it's not going to deliver repeat, right? So how about, tell me a little bit about that.
If you look at the Maslow hierarchy of needs, trust, security is at the bottom, belongings in the middle, and aspirations at the top. If you don't deliver on the functional things, if you're having a bad experience at a fast food chain, the service is slow, the quality of the food is not great, and it's not consistent, right? It's going to be really hard for that brand to make an emotional connection with you that is going to be lasting, right? Because there's a lot of anxiety being created. But most brands now...
Yeah, so you're going to make a negative emotional connection.
Well, yeah, exactly. One that's lasting and hard to overcome.
That's
but
right.
The idea here is, the competitive landscape, you can't play there anymore. You can't give customers bad service or extremely bad service. You can't deliver poor quality product. And you can't, damage your reputation and stay in business. And so most good operators are playing in that undifferentiated trust level. But what separates the winners from the losers is that they've made their emotional connection. You think of Chick-fil-A, for example. It has a huge following. Why? It's great quality, a consistent service. There's a lot of other chicken chains out there. Why is it? Because they've connected at an emotional level, the way you're treated. The owner is greeting you when you come in. There's this human personal interaction that happens that you don't get in any other chain. And so they're strategic in their beliefs, their values, and they communicate those very clearly. It's not for everyone, but those who believe in it are very passionate because they connect with them.
Well, it's so interesting because, even in the spirit of Think Blink, I've been seeing some other chicken chains that are using something that's similar to the Chick-fil-A blueprint. Raising Cane's has been, having a lot of buzz lately, and it's revolving around, kind of what they've been doing in making community connections in their decor and everything like that in their restaurants. Dave's Hot Chicken has done some similar kinds of things as well. Mm-hmm. And so some of them are using those same kinds of things, and they're creating these emotional connections with a kind of a blink factor because they have some things that connect them, to the brand in the blink of an eye. And then, the people who are going in reverse on this, almost figure you can say this without me saying it, but it's Cracker Barrel, right? Who seem to be doing like this whole redesign that it's turning off a lot of the people who like them because they're saying, I don't have that feel, like I used to have when I got in here. So, the blink connection or the blink factor is coming into play in some of those places, right?
Exactly. Well, remember the challenge is if you look at JCPenney when they did their original transformation, we call that the trust ladder. They lost trust in the customer because they went too far and they lost that emotional connection. They went from this sense of discovery and gaming was kind of the emotional connection to their brand. They went from that to fashion forward and, sophisticated retailing, but that's not what the consumers want, right? And I don't think Cracker Barrel is at fault there. They own nostalgia. They own a link to the past and to old fashioned values. And when you change the decor, make it contemporary and modern, and you walk away from those cues, you're going to alienate your core customers.
Yeah, I imagine that some of that is coming into play in that in some of what we're seeing. The thing about the Think Blink Manifesto is that there's 7 tenets of Think Blink. Why don't you kind of share some of that with us and give us some visibility into those tenets and which ones are like the hardest for companies to embrace?
I think the first tenet's the hardest, which is to make that shift from functional to emotional and to start mapping out your equities from an emotional standpoint versus functional, right? And you look at NPS scores, they're all anchored in customer service, product quality, will somebody recommend you? They're not talking at all about the emotional connection that consumer has with the brand and what is the emotion that brand owns. Like Volvo owns safety, Staple owns easy. Like, what is that one word that defines that brand? Mm-hmm. For one, but it's the hardest one. The second tenet is really about looking at design as a strategic tool. How do you take those insights, those emotional connections, and transfer those into actionable experiences? And how does design and design thinking play a key role in that? And then the third tenet builds on that, and it's really about providing a storytelling context. And because the way we learn is through storytelling. And so creating the right story that supports the narrative of the emotional connection and the challenges the consumer is facing, and how that translates against the entire customer journey is really critical. So that's tenet 3. And 4 is really about creating a clearly defined persona for your target group. Very often, companies we get embarked on, I say, okay, can you give me the persona of your core target group? And they go, well, we have data on our customers. Okay, but data. And I said, how much data do you have on how they emotionally feel about your brand? Well, we don't have any data on that. Do you have anything on lifestyle and lifestyle needs? Yeah, we have a bit of that. It's really understanding who's your customer, what are their key emotional drivers and cognitive drivers, and how do they differentiate from your competition? Tenet number 5 is one that I wrote a book on, the belonging experience, and that is ensuring your brand creates a sense of belonging, that you're giving them a forum to engage as part of the brand's community. And we did a study together for the banking industry on community banking. Mm-hmm. It's all about, and what we learned in that study is, service, product selection, convenience. They're all table stakes. They reduce attrition, but they don't drive growth. What drives growth is providing those customers a memorable, shareable experience. And part of that experience is that sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And 6 is really looking at the metrics. Are you measuring the things that matter, right? Are you measuring the emotional equities of your brand? Are you focused on all the traditional metrics? Because we know that what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets repeated. And then the final one is to future-proof. Tenet 7 is to future-proof your brand, because we know there's so much disruption. Mm-hmm. Think of AI 5 years ago. No one was talking about it. Now, it's the topic on every conference, every blog, AI this, AI that. And so really anticipating the future is really important. So those are the 7 tenets.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I will go back to that storytelling tenet, because you talked about that a little bit. And I'm just thinking, if you could share with us like an example of a brand that really nailed this notion of emotional branding, nailed this notion of, bringing the Blink factor to life, and then one that maybe really kind of missed it.
Okay, the one that brought the storytelling to life, I would say, is Dairy Queen. So Dairy Queen, when we were hired, was known for treats, but 30% of their sales, 20 to 30% of their sales was food. Mm. But when consumers thought of going to a restaurant, fast food chain for food or fast casual, Dairy Queen was at the bottom of the list. It was like 25 or 26. And so they weren't being selected for food. They were being selected for treat. And that's kind of obvious when you drive, in those days, you drive by a Dairy Queen, there's this, 30-foot cone in the front of the building. Mm-hmm. It's blue, right? When you walk in, all you see is the ice cream dispensing units and the ice cream cakes. How would you know? And so they hired us to look at what is that? How do we leverage hot food? And we did all kinds of concepts. We took them to research. One of them was grill and chill. And what we found out was that DQ had a rich history, nostalgic history in the people's community, and people wanted to celebrate that when they went to Dairy Queen. But they also wanted to celebrate the quality of food and have both treats and hot food together. And that's where the DQ Grill and Chill was launched. It's been phenomenally successful and consistent today as it was 15 years ago. So I'd say that was a brand that did really well on the Blink factor, that, if you looked at their facilities, we reintroduced stone and red and reduced the amount of blue on the brand, because red is about food, blue is about treats. So we changed all of the visual cues that brought in more food equities versus treat equities. A brand that didn't do it well, I would say, was JCPenney. When they did that big leap, they lost the consumer in that transition. Mm-hmm. Consumers have an emotional attachment to brands, and those emotional attachments may not be aligned to what the company wants to go, but they are the anchors of why the consumers are visiting that operation. In the case of JCPenney, as I mentioned, it was about promotions, the sense of instant wins, the sense of discovery, the sense of gaming. And when they changed the environment to being more like a discount department store, they lost that whole feeling, and hence the sales. And now if you look at, a couple of months ago, they just launched their new concept, and they're leveraging their gaming platform and evolving it. And so they've gone back to the roots, realized that's the roots, that's the emotional connection.
A couple of great examples there. So, when you think in terms of AI, we've got a lot of automation that's transforming the customer interactions. How can brands still make great, emotional connections at scale?
Well, AI is giving us a lot of opportunity. I mean, when you think of your mobile device, the thing that we have here that we use, this has got sentiment analysis built in. They just haven't activating it, or some platforms they have. Facial recognition now using AI can analyze your sentiment, tell you how you feel. And so that allows, and that allows institutions, let's take the assisted channel, the phone channel, you've got a complaint. They're using AI now to understand your sentiment. Are you agitated? Are you angry? Are you impatient? And that gives the person, servicing that customer a lot of prompts of how you're going to deal with that customer and how you personalize the messaging to their anxiety levels. Mm-hmm. These more of this and giving the knowledge tools to the frontline staff that they didn't have before, because customers are coming in now a lot smarter.
Yeah, even as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, you could have something on a customer service agent's screen where when a customer comes in really hot, they could have like this little red button blinking, de-escalate.
Yeah.
Because to be quite frank, sometimes people are not naturally inclined to de-escalate, but maybe that little reminder, de-escalate, might help them to realize, okay, this customer came in hot, and you need to de-escalate with them. You're correct. I mean, there's so many different ways that, AI can really be used to help provide prompts to agents in the assisted channel, even in the automated channel. If a customer is dealing with a bot and they're using certain types of language in how they're responding back and forth with the bot, it could signal the bot to say, you know what, this needs to be escalated to a human, or something along those lines, right? This can't go in some kind of a loop, 5 times before we get to somebody, kind of a thing. So I know that there are things that AI can do, and just access to information and pulling information together for the agents much faster could certainly help them to deliver better connections, with the customers. So I'm thinking about blind spots. I mean, like when leaders are trying to adapt to today's experience economy, like what would you say are some of the biggest blind spots that they're dealing with?
Thinking that their staff are a cost center versus a growth center. That would be the first one, that the first place that retailers are cutting is their staff. They're trying to replace them with automation. And they fail to realize that, yes, the employees have a role in operations, looking at stock, keeping the shelves filled. But they're also brand ambassadors in building that relationship. There's a reason why consumers are in the stores versus buying online. Mm-hmm. Want to explore, browse, and ask questions with real people. And I think the first mistake is that retailers are cutting their staffing levels in their stores, thinking that that's going to drive better margin. All it's doing is alienating the customers and driving them to the assisted channel or to the online channel, which we all know in conventional retail is unprofitable, mm-hmm. right? You're driving a customer that made their effort to come and visit you to an unprofitable channel. So that would be number one. I just understand that logic. It's still prevalent if you just read the headlines. The second thing, when you look at transformation and kind of blindsided, is not having a future-proof strategy. I mean, very few organizations, maybe the petroleum companies have it, but they do it. But most organizations don't do scenario planning. They don't create scenarios on what would happen. Every year we do a trends analysis. You can visit our website and look at trends analysis for the last 10 years. In 2018, we predicted the pandemic, and people made fun of us. They thought we were crazy, and we were bang on the money. We were just short by 18 months. We thought it was going to take 2 to 3 years. It was 18 months. And then the other one is, if you look at in the banking sector, we talked about unionizing banking 15 years ago. I said, with all this move to omni-channel and digital banking and mobile, you can't undervalue the human touch. And the studies we've done have proven that the consumers want to deal with people irrespective of the channel they're looking for.
Okay, so those are a couple of the blind spots that people are dealing with. So I think we've covered some of this already, but in terms of brands wanting to stay relevant and grow, talk about why they should shift from function first to emotion first. And I think we've hit on some of this a little bit, but why don't you share a little bit about that?
Well, you think of it. Let's start with the employees. They are brand ambassadors to the brand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if they're not emotionally connected with the brand, they're going to create a negative experience for that customer and make that customer, as we talked about, create friction points that will get in the way for that customer to have a positive emotional connection.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that customers who are emotionally connected to a brand are more loyal. They spend more. They share their insights. They're willing to be brand ambassadors. They become a retailer or bank or a CPG brand's most effective marketing vehicle. We overlook those because focusing on functional benefits or the newest whiz bang technology is sexier and from a comfort level, more understandable. When we start talking about emotions with clients, they kind of glaze over and go, I don't understand that part and how it links to growth. Yeah, because it's something that they can't put their finger on, they can't engineer. It's not the newest technology. And so it becomes hard, but it's the driver.
Well, it's interesting because as I think about it, I always tell people, look, if you pick a cable news network show, people pay a lot of money to run ads during those shows, right? Mm-hmm. And they're trying to get eyeballs for 30 seconds. But if you have a customer walk into your store, or you have a customer walk into your bank branch, or whatever it is, they're not spending 30 seconds there. They're spending much longer there.
Yeah.
And every employee that person engages with has to recognize I am the commercial. I'm either a good commercial or a bad commercial. Okay, but every person that they interact with in that store is a commercial, and you've got their eyeballs for longer than 30 seconds. So that impression that you make on that customer, okay, is in some respects bigger than the impression that 30-second ad's going to make on TV, or maybe it's a 15-second ad online. Or something like that. And so, like you're referring to them as brand ambassadors and everything like that. I kind of think of them as they're the commercial. And frankly, a lot of times people pay a lot of money to get those commercials on. So we got to make the most of those other commercials, those interactions, whether it's in person, it's on the phone, whatever the case might be. We've got to make the most of those commercials. So, as we come to wrapping up a bit, I mean, like, if there's one or two big takeaways that you want people to remember before we wrap this up, what would they be?
Organizations use metrics to determine their performance. My first thing would be, what are the measurement tools and methodology that you're evaluating not only the functional needs of your customers and your employees, but also what are the emotional ones,
okay.
Right? And what emotion does your brand own? And how can you focus all of your communication, your customer experience around that one emotional need and own it, right? That would be one. So measurement, clearly define your emotional needs would be go hand in hand. And the other one is understand how you deliver that emotional need across your channel and what's the role of humans, technology, and the physical space in delivering that experience, that emotional experience would be the other thing. And those are the two things I would say they need to focus on.
Cool. Now, you go into much more detail about all of this in the book, Blink Manifesto.
Correct.
So I imagine people can get copies of this book wherever books are sold.
Exactly.
Okay. How do people get a hold of you if they want to continue this conversation?
Well, they can go to my LinkedIn profile. by just typing in my name. I'm lucky there's not a lot of Jean-Pierre Lacroix in the world. Or you can go to www.sld.com and just hit connect, and I'll be in touch with you.
Cool. Well, Jean-Pierre, it has been a pleasure speaking with you and, delving into this topic. And I want to thank everybody who has joined us for today's program and for continually tuning in to Be Customer Led. We're going to wrap it up here for today, but you can be sure we're going to be back next time with another great guest to talk about those things that are important to the customer experience and the employee experience. But for now, we're out. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Marbu.
Thanks for listening to Be Customer Led with Marbu Brown. We are grateful to our audience for the gift of their time. Be sure to visit us at becustomerled.com for more episodes. Leave us feedback on how we're doing or tell us what you want to hear more about. Until next time, we're out.